morning and welcome. I'm Daphne Richards, Travis County Horticulture Agent with the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. Thank you for joining us for this webinar and our Texas Tough Plant Series. We've got a great program lined up for you today, the 6 Ds of Container Gardening Success. As part of this program, our presenter may refer to various source material or websites. Don't panic if you don't catch those in time to write them down. Please just relax and enjoy the webinar. All registrants will receive a follow-up email chock full of great stuff, including a link to the recorded session and links to any references or resources listed. Today, we'll be taking some questions about halfway through the program and again at the end of the session. To pose a question, you'll need to use the Q&A feature. Simply type in your question at any point and we'll address them at about halfway through and then again at the end of the program. We'll get to as many of your questions as we can, and we'll follow up after the program on any that we run out of time for. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming our presenter, Travis County Master Gardener Kirk Walden. Kirk received his Master Gardener certification in 2014 and has been an active presenter in many of our community events and educational programs ever since. In his presentation today, Kirk will convince you that whether you want winter color or summer vegetables, you can grow them in containers. In our session today, he'll cover the major considerations and decisions that lead to gardening success, from design and soil to irrigation and sunlight. Kirk, I'm excited for you to be here today and to learn more from you about growing some amazing container plants. So the stage is all yours.
Glad to be here. Let's get my screen sharing going here. So got to back this up just a little bit. There we go. I always preface these presentations by saying I used to work with a bunch of accountants, and those accountants always wanted to quantify everything. So I have this little screen called Kirk by the numbers. And those numbers are 25. That's the number of years that I've been gardening in Austin. 300. Actually, I'm having a little trouble seeing that number because I've got the screen. The other screen is blocking it. It's actually 3,000. The 3,000 is the number of plants that I have personally planted here in Austin with some varying degrees of success, I have to say. 100. 100 is the number of variety of plants that I have in my garden right now. It's a little bit of a fudge because I have 4 different kinds of Esperanza, I have 5 different kinds of Guara, but it's about 100. 30 is the number of different kinds of roses that I've grown here in Austin. I used to be part of the Rose Society. And 52, well, that's the number of weeks that you should be gardening. And lastly, 2014, as Daphne mentioned, that's when I became certified as a Travis County Master Gardener. So let's talk about container gardening. The 6 Ds of container gardening are design, dirt, diameter, and depth together. I sort of put those two together to talk about the pots, drainage, and daylight. We're going to talk about each one of those in succession that will lead you to container gardening success. So let's start with space to start with first. The question, and it seems like an obvious one, is how much space do you have? Obviously, the garden you see there, they've got a whole lot of space and plenty of room to maneuver, put those containers just about anywhere. By contrast, you have an apartment balcony. Now, I count 15 different pots on that balcony. So that proves that you can garden even in an apartment balcony. However, the palette of plants that you're going to get to choose from are going to be maybe not the exact ones that you had planned on, because the amount of daylight, amount of sun that you're going to get there, and the time of day you're going to get that sun is going to dictate the palette of plants that will work there. So not everything is possible there. Purpose. So I'm primarily an ornamental gardener. So I really like what you see there. Lots of different flowers. Most of those are perennials. Some of those are annuals, but they're all a lovely combination. But that doesn't mean you can't do anything else in pots. Vegetables work really well. That's some bok choy, that's some rosemary, that's a parsley there. All of those do well in pots. In fact, I still grow my basil in pots, even though I have room for them at other places, because the drainage is so important to the basil, so I can control that in a pot. Maybe you can combine ornamental and vegetable. That's a Spanish tomato. I thought it was just really lovely and delicious as well. You can also grow fruit, and there's a resource that we provide at the Master Gardeners of the types of fruit that grow well here in Texas and Central Texas. Here, this is a Meyer lemon tree you see here. Key limes grow well. Kaffir limes grow well. There's a whole list of ones that work very well. Maybe you can do a fruit and ornamental. This is a type of a kumquat tree that just looked lovely to me. It wouldn't work too well indoors over the long run. It needs more sun than that, but it's a lovely look. Style. Everybody, I had to work with a guy who told me everybody has a style, even if they don't know what it is. This is obviously a big, bulky, strong look. It's not something that would work in my garden, but works in a lot of people's gardens. This is my neighbor's look. I'm sorry to say that during the recent rainstorm, his tub here clogged up and it drowned about half of his plants, but they're replantable. This is more a traditional style. In fact, this was taken, I believe, at the San Antonio Gardens. This is my style. This is a Mexican bird of paradise, and that I have in my yard because I have created a sort of semi-tropical look. It isn't tropical, but it's semi-tropical in look, and it's complemented by a big pot here with the agave in it. And I remind you that all of these references are going to be available to you at the end. This is from the San Antonio water system and the San Antonio Botanical Garden. They have various styles. This is on the one on the left is a sort of a Mexican style. The one in the middle is sort of a cottage garden. The one on the right is hill country. And they have a list of plants that go with each one of those different styles so that you can complement the look of those. And you're going to get a hook to those. Also, take a tip from the florists and use a technique called the filler, thriller, and the thriller. Sorry, the thriller, filler, and spiller. And you see here the long grass coming out the top, which would be the thriller. The filler is actually, there is like two fillers in there with the coleus. And then finally, the last plant, I'm not sure what that is, that spills over the side of the pot. This is a technique that you can use in almost any situation. Here's a horizontal layout that allows you to still have the same principles of thriller, filler, and spiller. It doesn't have to be regular flowers either. It can be a stock tank tub, but still using the same techniques. Here's one in a little bit different look. And then finally, it's even possible to do this with succulents. You've noticed that cleverly that they've done here is put pots in pots to provide the different elevations for the design. Second, number two is dirt, and that's the soil. Dirt is bad, soil is good. Use potting soil, not topsoil. There's no reason to make it hard for the plant to grow, especially if you're in a clay area, or if you're on the west side of I-35 in the limestone rocks. So use potting soil, not topsoil. Medium packed, again, don't make it hard on your plant. Make it easy for the plant to put out roots and grow. And then don't be shy. Amend as needed. I mentioned earlier that I grow roses. When I grow them in pots with potting soil, a lot of the potting soils have a neutral pH, which is a 7. Roses like a little more acidic. So I will add a little iron sulfide to the soil to encourage those roses to grow. And then replace your potting soil annually. Do your plants and your garden beds a favor by putting that loose potting soil, which has now been pretty much exhausted of any nutrients, put it in your regular garden bed and refresh your pot. So 3 and 4, depth and diameter. That's the combination way to talk about the pots. It might seem obvious, but the first is fit the plant. You don't want a pot that's too big, and you don't want a pot that's too small. Here's an example. Shallow is fine, because pretty much anything that you want to plant in a pot here is not going to try and put down a big taproot. Instead, it's going to want to go sideways. It's want to go out and looking for water. So when you get those plants at the nursery, and they have the little tag that says dig a hole twice as big as the root ball. Well, keep that in mind when you're container gardening as well. That's about the right kind of dimension that you want when you're planting a new plant in a pot. About twice as big as the root ball. Then fit the style. If you have a cottage garden, you're going to want pots like the ones on the left. If you have a contemporary garden, you're going to want pots that are like the ones on the right. Fit the purpose. So these are called grow bags. They're a felt-like fabric that, when aesthetics aren't important, they can be really functional, because of their porous nature, more oxygen gets to the roots, and they'll grow faster. It's a very good thing for growing vegetables. In fact, there's a couple of master gardeners use these to grow potatoes, because not only do they grow the potatoes well, but they're also easy to harvest. Now, the caveat for these sort of things is that because they're more porous, they dry out faster. So they're going to need watering more often than your regular pot. So also, don't be shy about using inserts. And when I say inserts, these guys right here. I used to have a big pot that I kept tropical hibiscus in. And when the winter came, I never planted directly in the pot. I planted it still in an insert, so that I could take it out of that pot and put pansies in the winter that would survive. So you still would not want to put your plant from the nursery directly into the pot. You'd still want to pot it up into a larger insert and then put it into the bigger pot. In fact, if you'll remember this picture I showed you earlier, these roses are actually sitting in an insert in that pot. So when their season is over, they'll be replaced with something more appropriate for the winter. Okay, here's a story about pots. These are my plumeria that I'd grown from a stick. If you'll take a close look at them, you'll notice there's a problem there. You can't see it right now because the wind isn't blowing, but they're top heavy and they blow over, which damages the plant. So I got creative one day and I got a piece of rebar and I put that rebar, took the plant out of the pot, put that rebar down through the drain hole. So it's half in the ground and half in the pot, and put the plant back in. Well, it really worked well for a while because they didn't fall over. Unfortunately, the rebar blocked the drain hole, so the plants nearly drowned before I figured out what was going on. So now, here they are a couple of years later. Now I have a pot that has 5 holes in the bottom of it, and the plants have gotten so big that I have 2 pieces of rebar coming out the bottom. The plants stay in place, the plants drain, life is good. So the last thing on depth and diameter is a pot hauler. It's possible here for 2 people to haul as much easily 75 pounds pot using this contraption that has straps and an elastic component that allows you to pick up the pot and take it anywhere you want. In fact, the picture on the left, when I moved here from Fort Worth, is exactly the way I got my cactus down. Okay, drainage. Now, you heard me allude to that a little bit earlier, but let's talk specifics. First, drainage, you need a hole, but you're going to want a saucer and some other things to go along with that. Saucer will do 2 things. It'll protect the surface below the pot. It also will keep the hole open and allow for some moisture to come back into the pot. Probably the most overlooked and most important thing for outdoor gardening is pot feet. Okay, well, it's not really, those aren't pot feet, those are my wife's feet. But the idea is the same. You're going to want to elevate the pot above the ground surface, whether it's on a concrete like this one or whether it's sitting on the ground. Just sitting in the dirt, the pot is likely to clog in less than 2 weeks just sitting in the pot. So you're going to want to allow the water to drain out and keep the right amount of moisture with the plant. I was giving a version of this presentation to some master gardeners a while back, and one of actually the person who was president at the time was liked the presentation. And then when we had our meeting the next month, he came back and said, I've got some pictures for you. I want to show you my Japanese Aurelia. And this is the picture that she gave me. And it was sitting in her garden and not doing well at all. A month later, it looked like this for one and only one reason: pot feet. She elevated the pot above the ground so that it would drain, and the plant turned out beautifully. In fact, the picture I showed you earlier, it's a pretty fancy pot foot. It's a brick that elevates that plumeria above the ground so that it drains out one of the 5 drain holes in the bottom there. Plastic mesh. If you have ants in your plant, get in your plants, they're not coming in by crawling up the side of the pot and into the top. They're coming in through the drain hole. So a simple solution to that is to put mesh, a plastic mesh, in the bottom of your pot. It'll still let the pot drain, and the ants won't get in. Or if you have a bigger pot, you can use a product like this, which uses ceramic beads to the same effect. That's a felt-like fabric filled with ceramic beads so that the water can drain all the way through, and their root rot is not likely there. Drainage. This is called a reservoir planter or a grow box. This is allows for drainage, but it also has another clever effect. You're looking straight down into it. All those little holes at the bottom are actually an elevated piece that separates the dirt from a water reservoir, which exists at the bottom of this, at the very bottom. It's also a little pipe to fill the water reservoir at the bottom. And how that works is, as the water tries to evaporate, it is drawn up through the dirt on its way to the atmosphere, and that allows you to water much more. In fact, I had a west-facing patio when I first moved here, and I would have to water sometimes twice a day in the summer because it got so hot. Using a reservoir planter, I was able to water every other day, and it was really terrific. So I got the drainage, but I also kept the moisture that I needed. This is a more recent example of one. This is also a reservoir planter. You'll see it actually has a water gauge on it, so you can tell how much water is left in the bottom and when it's time to water. Once it's done, then there's some cellulose tubes that come out of the bottom. Right below those tubes is where the water reservoir exists. That helps transfer the reservoir into to the dirt, and the finished product looks like this. Now, you can also get these for regular pots. So you just have you can see the little L-shaped piece there that has the reservoir at the bottom, a fill tube. Another version of that is an Oya, which you fill with water. It's and bury it, and then as it seeps, here it is buried. As the water seeps out of the clay, it keeps your plant watered. This is really good for this particular one is good for vegetables. Drip. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about drip irrigation while I talk about drainage. It's really good for if you have a cluster of pots on a porch or something. You can pretty easily water those with drip irrigation by using the hose bib and a couple of little devices. The way you do that is you need three things, and you'll see the hose bib up in the left-hand corner of the screen. You need a backflow preventer, which keeps the water from going back into the faucet. You need a filter. You need a filter because the little holes that you're going to be watering through are really, really tiny, and they can easily get clogged. So you're going to have a removable filter. And then you want a pressure regulator. The pressure regulator is because the water coming out of your faucet is going to be around 60 pounds of pressure. Drip irrigation is designed to run around 30 pounds of pressure. So in order to keep your system from blowing up, you get a pressure regulator that cuts down the pressure and waters consistently. Another thing about drainage is the opposite of drainage is hydrogels. Now, these are very similar to what exists in disposable diapers. They will, if you have a hanging basket, you want hydrogels. You mix it in with the soil, and it retains the water, the moisture over a much longer period. Now, one word of warning with this, you get the idea that the more you put in, the better it's going to be. Well, I would admonish you to follow the directions, because I learned the hard way by mixing too much in. And when I did water, it became a white volcano and actually pushed the dirt out of the pot. So follow directions carefully. Last technique is daylight. How much sun and how much shade do plants get? So I say the right plant. So there's a Texas star hibiscus and a coleus. You plant those in a pot together, one of them is going to die. The Texas star hibiscus needs full sun. The coleus likes almost complete shade. So after some period of time, one or the other one is going to die. Here's another example. This is Damianita on the left and phlox on the right. They look lovely together. The colors look lovely together, but the Damianita needs very low water. The phlox needs medium water. So it might take a little longer, but again, one of these is going to die. Maybe you plant two of the same in different varieties. The red and the yellow columbine together are a lovely combination. Or this is actually my hibiscus on the right and one from the Wildflower Center. My hibiscus on the left and one from the Wildflower Center on the right. They need the same amount of. Here's a good combination here. This is ice plant and Esperanza. They both need full sun. They both are low water. You might even combine them a third one. Throw some lantana in there, and you've got a beautiful combination. Not time for a break. So, right place, right plant, right soil, right now. That's the one that part of this that always gets me in trouble because I'm always ready to plant. So to summarize the 6 Ds of container gardening: design, dirt, diameter, depth, drainage, daylight. And I'll leave you with one thought. There are always flowers for those who want to see them. Henry Matisse. I've covered a lot of different resources, but these will be sent to you. You don't have to be writing these down. Water Saver Lane, vegetable gardening in containers, native plants for container gardening in Central Texas, Earthkind, which is really a good tool because you can pick the environment you have. Is it sun? Is it shade? And then get a list of plants that fit that. Texas Superstars, not to be overlooked. I would remind you on this, though, that these Texas Superstars are for Texas overall, not just Central Texas. So be careful to choose the ones that are appropriate for our zone. More resources still, an actual list here, and then questions. So Daphne, over to you.
All right, thanks, Kirk. Great presentation. So we do have some questions coming in, and one is just asking for a clarification on the window screen material. That was to keep ants out, and is it just window screen material?
It's just window screen. I prefer plastic rather than the actual real metal screen because it doesn't rust.
Got it. And where would one get that? Just at a big box home store of some sort?
Big box. Yeah, but I don't recommend going to big box for anything else. But plants I would get somewhere else. But
I guess you could maybe order it online from a big box or online order
right.
Probably as well, right?
Right.
Well, you touched briefly on different types of containers and the watering and everything, but I don't remember us talking through the different types of containers, the different material, source material, and how that affects watering. And I know that's one question that I get a lot is, a terracotta pot versus a glazed terracotta pot versus plastic versus fiberglass. Let's talk through some of the different types of source material on pots and how that can affect the growing conditions.
Absolutely. Terracotta pot, and we talked about this, we didn't talk about this directly. Terracotta pot is going to be the most porous of all the ones we just mentioned. But that also means that it's going to get more oxygen in there. So the plant may grow faster in a terracotta pot, but it will dry out faster. Not as bad as the grow bags we were talking about. Glazing will slow that process down. My plumeria, I plant in a plastic pot, primarily for two reasons. One, they are a thirstier plant and they want to be wet. But also, it's a matter of convenience. I got to drill holes in those pots, so it's a lot easier to drill through plastic than it is to drill through a ceramic pot. I got to have special tools for that. Probably the most retentive would be a glazed ceramic pot. And that's going to hold more water than just about anything else you're going to pick.
Right.
My bougainvillea, the picture I showed you, the bougainvillea at the end, it's in a glazed ceramic pot.
You know, I love some of my favorite pots in my landscape for aesthetics are my glazed ceramic pots, but I will tell you for those larger pots, there's nothing beats a really decorative plastic pot because they're just so much lighter. So if you change your mind about your landscape and where things are as much as I do, I have to move those pots around. And so, or you have to move them in winter, they're easier to move inside. So there's nothing wrong with a plastic pot. I think people tend to dismiss them a little quickly, but they make them prettier these days as well. They're not all ugly and just
absolutely
some nicer plastic pots. There's some lighter weight fiberglass ones as well. Well, let's talk. So while we're staying on the pots, we've got a couple other questions coming in, but on containers, non-glazed terracotta pots in winter, especially if we have a really harsh winter, like we've had a few. We had a couple of degree days this year that were super cold, way down below freezing, down in the teens. A couple years ago, we had snow apocalypse. Talk about the lifetime of non-glazed terracotta in the landscape in winter.
That's gonna shorten their lifespan considerably.
Yes.
In fact, I had my basil in one this last year, and it literally split down the middle with the snow, with the cold. And I had properly watered it, everything. It didn't get hard, but it just got broken. So again, your plastic is going to hold up better than that, or the ceramic's going to hold up better in the winter than that.
Because of those pores in that unglazed terracotta, they breathe, and so they lose moisture, but they also take it on. And when they get wet, and then they freeze as well, the water in those porous cells within that container actually freeze, and so those pots do break if they are exposed to extremes of temperature like that, and heat can kind of do the same thing. Okay, so we talked about plant pot feet, the importance of drainage, but you know, some people have their pots on a saucer. Talk about drainage and using a saucer and how to manage that, because this is something that I don't think people quite understand is when you use a saucer, you are completely impeding drainage when you water.
That's right.
So there's some mitigating factors you have to use.
That's right. The ideal thing there, honestly, is to elevate the pot above the saucer. So if the saucer is really just a protective mechanism, not a catch-all, and doesn't block the drainage hole again. So I find that even with a saucer, if I'm I'll water the plant. I'll watch it drain. I'll pick the plant up, dump the saucer, put the saucer back. So then I have what I think is the right amount of moisture in the plant, and let it and leave it by that. But to just water it and not test how much is being blocked by the saucer is a recipe for drowning the plant.
And I need to point out, you definitely want to be watering your plants to the point of drainage. So you get salts built up in the potting soil, especially if you're using fertilizer. Even if you don't, our water contains salts, and those salts can build up in the soil. So I love those bottom container or irrigation methods that you showed, where you water with the tubing down the side or the oyas, or they're very water efficient. But if you don't occasionally drain the water from your potting soil, those salts that can build up and if you've ever had a container, you've got that salt that builds up on the top, you really need to be watering to drainage every time, or at least every third or fourth time, and really flushing that soil, that potting soil, of the salt. And as you correctly pointed out, potting soil doesn't contain any soil. If it's good quality potting soil, it's all completely organic matter. And so those salts can build up in that very quickly, and we want to get those flushed out. So if you've got a house plant, maybe this person has a house plant with the question and they've got it in their house and they need that drainage pan. I just recommend if you're just watering every third or fourth time till you just see a little bit coming out the bottom of that drainage hole, to every fourth or fifth time, take it out of that container, take it outside or to your kitchen sink and water from the top and flush it out until it drains completely. And that will help keep those salts from building up. And otherwise, outdoors, I really think the pot feet work much better. You don't really need a drainage pan outdoors unless you're trying to protect your deck or something to that effect. But I think pot feet, and as you showed, even just bricks, that's what I use for my pot feet, or just smaller bricks. I elevate my pots that way.
It doesn't have to be fancy. It just has to be functional.
It just has to work. And there are some cuter ones out there and some more decorative ones that look nice. So that's really nice.
You mentioned houseplants. I didn't cover this, but I could have. A good way to work them and have proper drainage is to put the pot inside another pot, but put marbles between them. So then when the actual soil drains, it drains into the pot that it's sitting in, and you keep that water away from the original pot.
Yeah. Another question about containers in winter is, how do you protect them if you have to leave them outdoors? If you don't have them in a garage, you can't bring them inside to a garage or a greenhouse. How do you protect container plants in winter? And I do this. So,
well, the biggest mistake people make, I think, is just throw something over the top and think they're done. The key to protecting those plants is to completely cover them all the way down to the ground, so that you have no air can come in underneath, no cold air can come in underneath. Still might not save your plant, but it's going to have a lot better chance of saving your plant if you can completely seal off the plant.
yes, that is exactly what I do, Kirk. But it's important for people to understand that advice, covering the entire pot all the way to the ground or the entire plant, is the same as it is for the garden. So in the garden, when you're protecting your plants in the winter, they're in the ground.
Yes.
We recommend that you cover the entire plant, weigh that material down so that no air can get in underneath. And so, yes, I think container plants are even more sensitive, even if they're not sensitive to winter temperatures. If they're not citrus or something that's tropical that would be damaged by cold, even if there's something that's more temperate, it can tolerate our winter. In a container, they're more susceptible to that winter injury because their roots are more exposed to that air.
Yes.
So I think any containers, even if it's a plant that's not tropical, that you wouldn't protect, if it gets cold enough in our environment, you want to still toss a blanket over that and put some bricks at the bottom and just weight down that blanket so it doesn't blow over, and you protect the entirety of the plant, container and all. Yes.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I do that a lot because I have some really large containers and I don't have one of those lifter things that you mentioned.
Pot hauler, yeah.
I just throw a blanket over it and cross my fingers, say a little prayer. All right, so we have another question about the drainage hole and the screening. And I hear people talk about doing this a lot, Kirk. So let's dispel this myth. Should you put rocks in the bottom of your pots over the hole before you plant them, before you plant your pot? Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
That's wasted space. The only thing I've ever seen that additive that made any sense was trying to make the pot lighter by putting pool noodles in the bottom. So it wasn't quite so heavy that way. But other than that, no, you shouldn't do that. There's no need to do that. You should have enough drain holes to let the pot drain.
Yeah. So it definitely needs drainage. So a rock would clog the drainage hole. And if we're talking about space, the pool noodle thing, I've also seen some other TikTok hacks with empty water bottles and some different ways to save on space so the container doesn't get so heavy. I just prefer that you put your plant in the correct size container. I think it's going to be happier long term. If you put really short plants in a really tall container, that can represent a problem. But we've got some of those beautiful tall containers that need a little less space in the bottom. And I think a lot of people want to put 6 inches of pea gravel or 6 inches of rock or something in the bottom to kind of keep it in place and then also take up some of that space. But that really does impede drainage and creates what's called a perched water table, similar to what you'd have in a garden. And it's just like planting your plants in a pool, in a cement
Right.
pool, or on top of limestone or on top of caliche. It creates the same situation in a container as it would in the landscape. So that's really not something that we want to do. Okay. All right, let me keep looking through the questions here. Okay, let's see. We've got some a question about mosquitoes and the pots with those reservoirs in the bottom. Do those lead to mosquitoes in your experience, Kirk?
They do not, and I've used some pretty large ones. There's two reasons for that. In the picture that I showed you of the sealed container where it filled only from the top, the mosquitoes can't get in there, so you don't have to worry about that. The first grow box I had, you filled it from the side. You didn't have the top down drain. And I did put a mosquito dunk in there so that because the mosquitoes could come in through the side. But most of them now are the top fill kind, and you're really very, very unlikely you're going to have any mosquito problem.
Yeah, I've experienced the same thing. They can't get down to that part where there would be any standing water. I've not had any problems with mosquitoes in any of mine either, so I can confirm that. Okay, so let's talk about potting soil. We can't recommend a particular brand over another, but what in your estimation, in your shopping, and I'll give my thoughts as well, what are some of the ingredients that make a good potting soil, and what should we be looking for when we're shopping for potting soil?
Well, I like potting soil. I like the types of potting soil that give you the composition on the bag. And not all potting soils do. So whatever your personal preference is of mix, you can see how closely that potting soil fits that. So if you're big on peat moss, there's some brands that have a lot more peat moss in it. I'm not much of a vegetable gardener, so I don't pay that much attention to some of the nutrients. But I pay enough attention to know the brands I like, which I'm not going to mention. Yeah.
Well, I would say one of the things that I like to tell people is to look for a potting soil that's closer to brown or dark brown than to black. All of the ones that I've seen have been really low quality, have been closer to black in color. And so some of it has to do with the amount of time that's spent in creating those mixes and the amount of aging that they go through and the lack of oxygen. So something that's closer to a black color is more closer to a muck situation that's kind of developed without enough oxygen. And so if you think about compost and how compost develops and the different colors that you get, that's one good rule of thumb that I can give people is stay closer to the brown or dark brown products than anything that's closer to black.
Right.
Yeah, I at one point bought a whole different, lots of different brands and would just show them to people and kind of teach that concept. It's kind of challenging to do until you can see the products. Also, you want to look for something where you can kind of see that the product used to be plants. So it kind of looks kind of like ground up plants. It might have little pieces of what might look like root hairs, but they're just finely grated up plant fibers, which would be more of your peat moss products, your sphagnum products. But then also cocoa coir has gotten really big lately, and that is a more sustainable product than your peat moss products are. That's a more finite resource than cocoa coir. And a lot of those products work just fine as well. But the key, as you pointed out, is to stick with something that is soilless. We say potting soil, it confuses people. We want a soilless mix in a container because in those containers, as we've pointed out multiple times, it's really challenging to get the watering right. If it's a cloudy day or it's cloudy for a week and you weren't expecting it and you got the water regime down, your plant might end up with a little too much water. and end up in a situation where microbes can grow, fungi and bacteria, and cause disease issues. And that's really going to be exacerbated if you have any sort of soil in your mix. So you definitely want soilless mix in all of these containers for sure. Yeah. So we did have one last question on, and it pertained to lavender. And so I would like to address it because he pointed out that his his lavender in a container just died from one day to the next. And I would say that has happened in my yard, not even in containers. So lavender, in my experience, is just very finicky about how wet or how dry it is. If it stays too dry for too long, it will die. But if it gets wet, the minute any disease issue starts with lavender, it just really craters. It's very sensitive to humidity in the air. So it could also be that we had a moist spring like we had now. Have you had an experience with lavender in containers?
I have not had any experience with lavender in containers. I know the reputation, so I know better.
Yeah, so very sensitive, I would say, to moisture, not only in the soil, but in the air, because they love that Mediterranean climate with a nice little breeze and lots of sunshine. And I think that's just something that happens. I've never had a lavender last in my yard more than about 4 years. It's just what I've come to expect, that about every 3 to 4 years, we have a wetter than normal spring or a wetter than normal fall or winter. And that's just something that they can't take in the soils that I have, which have a little more clay than maybe they're accustomed to having in the Mediterranean, where they're happy. I'd love to move to the Mediterranean too, but can't do that. Okay. We've got one last question about perlite and vermiculite in potting soils. And so you talked about hydrogels, and I think those are becoming more common, and they do help with that water retention issue. But going back before those even existed, we used to use more perlite and vermiculite in our potting soil mixes. I remember making up soilless mix in grad school by getting the sphagnum peat moss and the vermiculite and perlite and just making our own mixes. Sunshine mix number 3. I know some of our participants on the call will remember some of those sunshine mix recipes that we used to use for those soils. But those also, I would just point out, are for water holding and to increase some aeration in those containers as well. All right. Well, that's all the time that we have for today. Thanks, everyone. We'll follow up individually with any unanswered questions. Thank you, Kirk. I really appreciate you being with us today and for sharing your knowledge and obvious passion for growing plants in containers. And thank you to our attendees for participating. Very soon, you'll receive an extensive email from us, including a link to a short survey, and we'd really appreciate if you filled that out. Your feedback will help to ensure that Extension can continue to offer these types of valuable programs in the future. That email will also include a link to access the recording of today's session, a list of resources for further study, and links to any websites or source material listed by Kirk, along with information on how to contact our gardening helpline and how to subscribe to notifications for future seminars and our Texas Tough Plant series, as well as other AgriLife Extension programs on horticulture and gardening. Until next time, thank you for joining us and happy gardening.